Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning. We look forward to speaking with you today about life after resilience technology implementation. You might be considering implementing a technology or you already have, and we're here to share some ways that you can capitalize on that investment. I'm Sidney Weinstein. I'm a senior manager here in BDO's resilience practice. We help clients to design and operationalize resilience programs, which can include operational resilience, business continuity, crisis management, third-party risk management, and disaster recovery, as well as designing the supporting technology for those programs, which we'll talk about today. I am a self-proclaimed data quality nerd, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is in a moment.
And then, hi everybody, my name is Quinn Einck. I am a manager in BDO's resilience practice as well, so I work very closely with Sidney. I have experience in all those resilience domains that Sidney just listed. So anything resilience or risk, you name it, I've probably done a little bit in it. But in the last year or so, I've gotten much more involved in the technology side of things, specifically product management. When I'm talking about product, I'm talking about the technology itself. And that's been really exciting for me, kind of switching gears in terms of focusing on resilience, but now looking a little bit more into the technology side of things. And it does say here that I'm a user experience evangelist. That's one of the things that coming in with a little bit of a newbie perspective, I always think about what it's like to be the end user and what it takes for them to kind of engage with the technology. But we'll get more into that as well.
Awesome. So today we really will touch on three main topics. As Quinn mentioned, how do we engage our stakeholders? That's not just with technology, but in general, and how we roll out new technology and do change management. We want to talk about embracing automation. We know that data is important and good data is even better. So how do we get that? And then with the changing risk landscape, right, whether that's new regulations or new risks emerging, our programs and our business are changing. So we have to be aware of that and change our technology to support these changes that are happening in our environment. So what you see up here is the absolute dream. This is what we want to hear from our stakeholders about our technology. Wow, this is so easy to use. It helps me do my job. It's effective. It's straightforward. One way we do this is just by providing simple directions on the screen. We don't want them to have to go back and reference their annual training. We want to make it as simple as possible. So everything that we'll be talking about today, we hope leads you to a place where your stakeholders are coming to you and giving you this kind of feedback. Before we get started, we do want to hear from you all. We're going to go ahead and launch a poll. Where do you face the most challenges today with operationalizing your resilience technology? Is that user experience, as Quinn was mentioning, implementing automation, or change management? We'll give you a minute to share those responses. Wow, we're really neck and neck between implementing automation and change management. So what we're seeing that maybe implementing automation is taking the lead here, which is one of those things that might sound easy, but is in reality hard. It also ends up relying on our relationships in the organization to find places where that data lives and then connect it to our technology. But we'll touch on each of these. So here you see some of the common pitfalls or the issues that we all have and face when implementing technology that really lead us to some of those challenges. One here that I will note first is the lack of ongoing support. So as we implement our technology, we've rolled it out, we did an amazing job. But we're also adding a new role or new responsibilities for our existing resilience team. We might not have grown up as technology experts. We might be resilience experts, but we are learning a new skill with technology, and we have to provide ongoing support year over year to our end users. So do we include this in our existing teams, responsibilities? Are there other teams in IT that can support us on this, or do we need to look to adding new team members or new hires to our team as a result of this? Another thing is the degree of change. We see sometimes when we do too much too fast that our stakeholders kind of step back and we have a negative response. So we just want to always make a measured change when we're rolling out technology to make sure that we're doing it in bite sizes that make sense for our audience. And then reporting, which is a pretty big challenge, but also opportunity for us as resilience practitioners. We have access to so much data, business data, application data, RTO data, and beyond. How can we look across all of this data from a business perspective, IT perspective, maybe even a privacy perspective, and so on, and find insights and share that with leadership and the business? We have a big opportunity having access to all of this data. Some guiding principles that can help us steer away from some of these pitfalls are, number one, hopefully we haven't designed our program around the technology. Now, I will say this, and we were debating whether we wanted to talk about this or not, but there's a balance between taking the technology out of the box so that it is easily updated over the years, and also customizing that solution to your organization, which is something that you definitely want to consider. But either way, we don't want to just take what's out of the box if it doesn't fit our program. We mentioned the change management aspect. We want to make sure that we're doing that at a measured pace. And as Quinn mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about, it's not about you. It's about who we serve. It's the business. It's our business continuity champions out there. It's our leadership and ultimately our customers. We will need to provide ongoing training. If you build it, they won't just come. We found that out. We need continuous awareness, engagement, and adoption. Think about your long-term plans. You may be, let's say you're implementing a technology and you're starting with business continuity, but you're going to start next year, you have plans to build out disaster recovery as well. Let's think forward. What other programs may we want to include so that we design in a way that leaves those options open to us? And then lastly, when you can, balance your old or your legacy program requirements with your future build. If you have the opportunity and are able to, and the data is good, make sure to port that data over or migrate it into your new system so that your business feels like you're taking care of them and not all their work didn't go to waste. You may have seen graphics like this, and the message is really, how will implementing a technology change how you and your team spend your time? So right now or before, you may be spending a lot of time on data collection. And the idea and the goal is that you want to spend your team's time on analyzing that data rather than collecting it. So, moving from, data collection, meetings, workshops, one-on-ones, collecting BIA data, when maybe that becomes more self-service. And then your team can shift on focusing on finding, for example, a single point of failure or, maybe trends throughout the business that you need to address. One thing is you might be thinking, well, how would I even know where I'm spending my time. And so we have an activity that you may want to consider doing with you and your team to identify where you're exactly spending your time as individuals and as a team. So if you head to the next slide, here's just an example. You can see here this team was spending 12% of their time in metrics tracking and 15% of their time doing compliance tracking. That's a lot of time. With their technology, after leveraging technology, they were able to reduce this time. But basically, they sat down together and actually mapped out what percent of time they were spending where. This might be valuable to do over time to see if that changes. And if it has, it would be a great thing to report to your leadership and see, for continued investment into technology and how it impacts your team. So we're in it for the long haul, or at least a medium term once we've implemented technology. And we know it's quite a journey. So you start with defining your program. You may be gathering your business and technology requirements, and then you consider your options and you select a technology. Then you design and roll out. Today, we're really going to focus on what happens after you've launched the system and you're rolling it out to your stakeholders and providing that ongoing support. So that's where we'll be focused today. I just want to make a note, please feel free to ask questions throughout, or we'll have time at the end as well, and we'll do our best to answer those.
Definitely. All right. So, moving forward, I do want to focus on the fact that in the polling questions, not as many people were as concerned or found struggles with engaging with the end user and that user experience. And that's what this section is really going to be about. How do you engage with your stakeholders? And that really starts with, as kind of Sidney led us to, it's not about you. Up until this point, it's been about you and your team and the hard work that you put in implementing a technology. You spent the time, the effort to really think about the design, how the end user would use the tool. But at this point in time, there's been a shift. Now the focus needs to be on the end user, the people that are using the tool day to day. And that can be something that can be a little bit of a paradigm shift for some folks. But it's crucial to remember that while resilience is not, is what we do as practitioners, it's not necessarily what your end users do. This is not their day-to-day job. Your end users have different roles. They have different responsibilities. And we need to make sure that this tool, this technology, is as easy as possible for them to engage with, and that they have a positive experience with it, and therefore they have a positive experience with your program. So keep that in mind going forward. So now that we know it's about the end user, who are the end users? We have a handful of representative examples that are shown on the slide here from someone who is considered the resilience program lead, maybe a handful of you who are on the call, the people who oversee your resilience program and oversee the strategy. There are also users who may be executive leadership, people who are a part of the C-suite. These are the people that allocate the funds and resources for your program as a whole, but they may engage with the tool as well. And then another example are the business unit, departmental leads, those resilience leads in business. These are the day-to-day people who are really putting hands to keyboard and engaging with the tool on a very tactical level. So the reason why I call out all of these different roles is that they will engage with your technology in a different way. Their experience will differ significantly in some cases. For example, you may want to consider things that would be different in terms of their profiles and permissions. What will some of these users be allowed to see and what others shouldn't? In terms of visibility, the same idea comes here, ensuring that the interface is as simple and intuitive as possible for that role and for that type of person. And then another area of focus, and one Sidney and I will definitely emphasize a lot, is reporting. The reports that are meant for, that executive leadership level are going to be significantly different than someone on the day-to-day, business lead, departmental type of person. So what they're going to be looking for, the metrics that they're tracking to, are going to be different. And that's something to really keep in mind when it comes to, designing a user experience. It's not one size fits all. It's a one size or many size fits a handful or a few. Overall, the experience should be similar, but it might not be the same. So kind of to put it plainly, put yourself in your end user's shoes. Understand their unique challenges, understand their requirements, and really think, what it's like to be them in the day-to-day and how they leverage your resilience tool. With all that being called out, we also want to think about the user experience. So what you're looking at here is what we like to call a journey map. What's unique about this journey map is that it's not simply about how people engage with your tool, but it's also how they engage with the program. So it's how they engage with the tool, and some of the times when they don't. And what this really does, as you can see, is it maps out the different phases of your resilience lifecycle, the different activities and key milestones that you track against, and really think about where that technology does and does not play a role. And that's really important to really think about the structure of your program and how your tool interplays with it. As Sidney said, out of the box can be an effective way of managing things, but customizing it is also an option. And there's usually a fine line to cross there. And one thing that we really want to emphasize here, again, it's all about that end user experience and how people engage. You want to think about, how are people feeling when they use your tool? It might be something that gets you out of your typical comfort zone of gathering data for some instances, but you want to think, is the user having a good experience? Are they potentially confused? Are they having challenges? Are things unclear? So you have to think at what points in this journey people will be experiencing with your tool and what they're trying to essentially do. Really, something like this journey map provides backing for expectations from your end users in terms of time. Like I said earlier, not everyone has all the time in the world to focus on resilience. And their time is really precious. All of our time is precious. So we have to think about, how do we back up how much time it will take to go through each activity, minimize it to whatever extent possible, and making those experiences meaningful. So really, this approach and technique builds more structure around not only your technology, but your whole programmatic experience. And it really, served to support that user experience in general. Moving on now to, we've called out what the journey is, right? And we've talked about how we have different personas, but now we want to think a little bit about, how do we build demand? As Sidney said, we're focusing on, this is post-launch. And you have to kind of consider, how do people engage with the technology? Are they aware of the technology? You want to think in terms of this demand spectrum. How do you move someone from the left to the right? Some of those crucial activities to consider are calling out the benefits of the tool, making it very clear. How does this help them? How does this deliver value? What is it not only for the business, but for the day-to-day user? Why is this something that they would want to engage with? So making it very clear what this technology does and how it supports the program, and ultimately how that program supports them. And additionally, like I said, setting some of those user expectations in terms of time, resource requirements, and so on. So a good first step, though, when building demand for your technology and building up some of awareness, is understanding where some of your stakeholders fall on this demand spectrum. You might have some people who are unaware or a draftee. So how do you engage with them? Typically, it's going to be through training and supporting them and really demonstrating that value and really kind of speaking to that aspect of, why should you use this tool? Other people you might consider, quote, friendlies. You might have people who are already bought in. They believe in your program, people who believe that this technology is helpful. You don't really have to sell to them, but you can help them to spread the good word about your tool. You can even use them as trusted agents to be people who test enhancements before they go out. Really making sure before it goes out to the masses that there is a little bit of an understanding of how the end user will experience this tool. So keep all of that in mind when it comes to building that demand. And really knowing where your stakeholders fall in this spectrum is important so you can engage with them effectively. Just remember, it's not always going to be the same across your personas, across the people you're trying to engage with.
And one thing, Quinn, on that, and I think to share is sometimes we actually map out before we go to speak with different teams in the business and truly be intentional about where do we think that this team or group falls on the spectrum, and how do we have to approach them and the topic differently. That will vary, like Quinn said, but it's good to intentionally think about, okay, we know that finance falls here, maybe operations is here, and so on, just so we can tailor our approach.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for jumping in. So at this point, this is all great, but we want to talk a little bit how do you actually build that engagement? We understand the personas, we understand the journey, we understand demand varies, but from an operational standpoint, we want to focus on at least these three things. We want to think about making things user-friendly, which I will probably beat into the ground, focusing on training, and there's a handful of ways of doing that, and really encouraging feedback. So kind of getting into making it user-friendly, we want to think about design. We want to have an interface that people like seeing, that's visually appealing. As silly as that could sound, it does make a difference. Think about the applications you use day to day, the ones that are designed in a way that make you enjoy going through them and working with them. That leaves a good experience. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of ways of really connecting with the end user's user experience. You can think about your company or organization's culture and how people would integrate and communicate and work with your tool.
Hey, Quinn, I was also thinking about how much data we're collecting. Does that impact the user experience? Because in a BIA, typically we want a lot of data, and oftentimes we want more and more data, but does that impact the user experience?
Definitely. It's one of those things where you don't want to collect data for data's sake. And there's a lot of exhaustion that can go into it. I can speak from being someone who has led BIAs, that you don't want to get stuck in those weeds. So it's being really intentional, as you said, thinking about how, every field that you ask someone to fill out, that's time, that's effort, that's thought. And you can have the best intentions, but you really have to think about how it really feels as being that person filling in that data.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Then going into training, like I said, there's a handful of ways of doing training. This also comes down to what's most effective at your organizations or at your company. But I like to put them into two buckets, especially when it comes to technology. There's that hand-on training where you're having workshops, you are spending the time, kind of a white glove service with your end users, and really walking through the end-to-end demonstration of a tool, having office hours, making yourself very available. That can be really time consuming. Kind of talks back to what Sidney was saying earlier, and how are you spending your time? Typically speaking, that's not where you want to lean, especially with technology. You want to think in terms of automation and making things easier. Sidney will talk about that in just a second. There's also the ability to build in knowledge at the point of the action, or in-app guidance, things that allow the person who would much prefer to just do this offline to be able to do so. And that's something that's exciting with a lot of tools, especially now enhancements are coming forward to make it as easy for someone to do this on their own. So training can actually be done on the spot, which is a really effective way of using everyone's time and building out your tool. So something to really consider in terms of maybe future enhancements, or something to leverage more if you already have that kind of built out in your current tool. And then lastly, feedback. Feedback is super crucial. It is kind of the lifeblood of your tool in order for it to stay relevant and meaningful to your end user. you want to encourage a feedback loop. You want to make sure that, as Sidney called out earlier with legacy users, you want to make sure that not only they are heard, but your current users as well. You want to incorporate the feedback that they provide, enhance in a way that serves your goals, but also makes their experience better. So keep those in mind. Those are really great ways of building engagement with your end user. And before we move on to the next section, I just want to call out the fact that this is not just words. This is true. We've had some experience with some clients where we've really focused on that end user experience and have seen a lot of great success. So with these examples, these screenshots, notice that we really are trying to focus on a consistent layout or theme or color scheme. One thing that is important is you don't want to move from one screen to the next and it be jarring and the format to be different, or the user interface, the way you click next is in a different area. That can actually be a showstopper. Including in-screen guidance, you can see some reminders and some simple sentences just saying what the end user should do. Pretty straightforward, but can kind of get lost in the mix sometimes. And then really emphasizing a clear design and trying to tie it back to your company branding if possible, because that's what really makes the end user feel like this is our tool. This isn't just your resilience program's tool. This is my company's, my organization's tool, and it feels like something I'm used to seeing. So also notice one of the things that I've found to be really effective are utilizing things that draw the end user to what they are needing to do when they engage with your tool. So you'll maybe notice something on the screen that says my sites or my tasks. And it really calls out, areas that they should be focusing on and that their eyes should be drawn to. So hopefully these examples resonate with you all. But with that, I think I will pass it on over to Sidney.
Thanks, Quinn. All right, you definitely are the user experience evangelist. So we want to shift to talk about, and I see some activity in the chat around data. Someone mentioned, you always want to have a good data source of truth, and define what that is. So we want to talk about that. And there's multiple times this happens. There's your initial implementation where you sit down and you decide, where are we going to connect, whether it's via an API or manual pulls, other ways of getting data into your system from other systems or teams. And then there's the ongoing plan. So maybe when you implemented, you said, okay, we're going to connect to our CMDB, but you have future plans to connect to your HR system and so on. Or maybe you're more advanced. You've done all of those and you're going to continue to connect to other like risk and due diligence systems. That's great. But this is going to be an ongoing effort rather than a one-time effort. So just want everybody to be aware of that. And one thing that this will lead us to is, as we mentioned earlier, as resilience practitioners, we have access to a lot of data. And that, we can really look at risk data as an asset. And that's an asset to our organization and our customers and the business to say, okay, here's where we see risk based on the data that you've provided. But for all of us on the phone and all of you, it can also help us progress in our own careers, because you have insights and ability to look at data across the organization that maybe others don't. And for example, during an incident, that becomes very valuable. So being there and being able to provide that data and feed it back in an insightful way is actually, it's really valuable to both you, your team, and obviously to the business. So just think of it as, an asset to you as well in your career, and also understand, as someone mentioned, where are those golden sources? Those sources also are based on your relationships in the organization. So start to think about, what's the data that I need, would be there, help us gain insights, and start building those relationships like you would when you want to build out relationships with the members or people involved in crisis management before the crisis. We may want to take that mindset and apply it here with data as well. And as we mentioned, this is life after implementation, and it will be going on for a while. So There's changes both in the risk landscape, the regulatory landscape, and in our business. Maybe there was a change in business strategy, or we've acquired a new business. All of these outside influencers or external factors will influence could influence our resilience program. For example, operational resilience, we're going to need to shift to defining our services and identifying and mapping our processes and everything that supports them. So that was a big shift. But there may be other ones. Large language models is one that's a little bit different, but still interesting. Some technologies have chat functions now. Well, it's great if the data that you have in the system is good, then it's going to give you the information you need. But if it's not, it's just only going to, it's not going to be very helpful to us. So I think as we start to have ways that help us access this data better, and not just us, our end users, it will be even more important to us that the data is of good quality. And as Carol mentioned, we have those golden sources defined. And this is one of the major reasons that, I mentioned I'm a data quality nerd, is so that we can use cool tools like this going forward, where someone else mentioned too, I think on the user experience, we want it to be super easy in the chat. That's one way that hopefully going forward, our end users will be able to engage with this data.
Awesome. I think that brings us to our final section, which is prioritizing product management and specifically thinking about how you implement change at a measured pace. This is something that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and it's incremental, and it's really important to be purposeful with how you approach change, especially with your technology. As Sidney said, once you have a technology, you can never just let it sit. You have to always have a pulse on how things might be changing. And a really good way of managing that change is something I called out a little bit earlier, which is called product management. And what is product management? Just to level set again, the product itself in this instance is your resilience technology or tool. So that's the product. And obviously, this is going to be how you manage it. Product management typically includes having some sort of technology vision or a vision for the tool, outlining your technology development goals and aligning them to your business developmental goals and needs, focusing on prioritizing enhancements. So really thinking about how this technology needs to change and improving, the overall operational efficiency of the technology and how it supports your program, and really managing the tool itself, making sure that it's being handled efficiently, that it's bringing, the ability to, confidently recover to some sort of disruption to the end users. So really, thinking more tactically at this point about how you actually manage your technology. Product management follows a pretty structured approach, in terms of handling technology issues. Like I said, there's going to be bumps in the road. There are going to be issues with some of the enhancements you make. It's important to always do testing. So that's a big part of product management, making sure that things actually work. There's a lot of testing. I can attest to that. No pun intended. And then as well as focusing on those enhancements, improvements. That's where that feedback comes in, really listening to the end user, trying to stay on top of changes in your industry or your market, and really staying on top of those things. And then lastly, ongoing support for your end users. Product management really takes that into account. It kind of ties back into that user experience, which I was nerding out about a little bit earlier. But product management is a process and a methodology essentially to support you in your gradual change management. So this might not be in your current day-to-day efforts. This might not be a hat you're currently wearing, but it's definitely one you should be thinking about and focusing on. It really helps you manage that technology in a way that can support your future growth. And this is a hat you might want to consider wearing every now and then or having support with.
Yeah, and Quinn, I think that's an important note. We might have, some folks that are a team of one or up to having a very large team. And this can scale up or scale down, I think. Like you mentioned, like maybe this is something you just work on a couple hours every week or something like that, to, you know, having an actual product manager as a member of your team. We do see what the makeup of resilience teams look like. We're starting to see that change, where there are many teams that have product managers, even more than one, dedicated, depending on the size of the organization. But that will only become more and more important.
Yeah. And take it from me, someone who was originally in a lot of traditional resilience areas and then getting into product management. It's possible. It's not that daunting. And it's really interesting. It's a good way of understanding all the inputs of your technology. So do not be intimidated by any means. With that being said, I want to call out two of the areas I find to be very important about product management, making sure that your technology is aligned with your strategy. One of the things that is oftentimes forgot is being strategic, really thinking about your technology for the long term. It's really easy to build your technology into a corner if you're not careful, if you're not thinking about where you could go with it. Especially if you are really focused and have a customized tool. You don't want to customize it in such a way where now you have to backtrack and think of a new solution to get out of that, and always have to come up with novel solutions. So in order to kind of address that, you want to consider some of the following things, which is, charting a vision for your technology. It's almost like having a mission around, how you're going to utilize your tool. Setting strategic touch points, making sure that you're connecting with those leaders, the people that you should be, to making sure that this tool is aligned to strategic goals and really, not straying from that path. It's very, very important. And then just like with anything, any initiative, any effort, you want to get buy-in. You need buy-in from leadership. You need those, programmatic leads to be on board, to believe that this tool is something worth engaging with, something worth spending the time, money, and resources, whatever it is. It's really important because with that backing, usually you'll be able to move people along that demand curve, which I was talking about earlier. Leadership support is a really good way of encouraging adoption of a tool. So keep that in mind when it comes to the strategic side of things. From a tactical perspective, I won't bore you all, but product management is very similar in some ways to project management. It's, a management style approach. You have, executing the product management process, and there's a lot of different ways of going about it. If you're familiar with sprints or backlogs, this is something that you be familiar with, but essentially it's taking in requests or bugs, testing them, and then pushing to production and getting feedback, and that kind of loop. That's the day-to-day of product management. Having regular technical team touch points, making sure that you're regularly keeping the pulse on things and staying on top of actions. And then, regular tracking and updates. This is the kind of stuff that supports those conversations on the strategic side, but also on the operational side. In terms of product management, you really want to stay on top of any risks or opportunities even through this process. So, and as Sidney said, this does scale over time. Change is incremental, and it really is based on the needs of your company or your organization. Some organizations have product management on the very tactical side, and sometimes it's something that's talked about, with steering codes and with the board of directors even. And it comes down to where you are in your journey and where you want to be. So with all of that, I believe that takes us to our key takeaways and wraps us up in terms of the content in this webinar. So hopefully you all have taken some thoughts and ideas from this, whether you are just curious about the topic, or if this is something that was really pertinent to your day-to-day and really thinking about the technology you're trying to promote. We do want you to walk away from this with the following 3 ideas, which first being to empower, engage, really drive engagement and resilience by training stakeholders, mastering that new technology, making them feel comfortable with it, focusing on that end user experience, which I am so adamant about, and making sure that engagement is really crucial at the top of your mind. Automation, which is obviously something everyone here seems pretty interested in. We really want to free up our time to focus less on the administrative and more on the analytics and monitoring for the future and adjusting to changes in the market, and leveraging that risk data as an asset. As Sidney said, and we've said a few times, data is important. How we capture is important. What data we're capturing is important. So keep that in mind as well. And then lastly, don't let your technology sit. It's always going to be changing. Things are always changing in our landscape and any business landscape. So, keep your technology's function aligned with the people you are working with, and aligned to your business needs. Product management is a very useful tool and methodology to follow to kind of help you handle that, as well as handle any sort of ongoing adoption and ultimately provide the success for your technology. Sidney, do you have any other thoughts on these as well?
Well, we're having some questions come in, so maybe we can discuss those. Okay. First, what do you do if you're struggling to get project leaders on board? I'm going to ask, or I'm going to assume in this instance, we mean maybe those in the business that we rely on to support the business continuity program, maybe. Lucy, feel free to clarify. I would say listen to them. Okay, cool. We're on the same page. I would say listen to them. Truly, what are, if they're not on board, do they have a problem? Is it something out of your ability to handle, whether it's like they have other priorities, or what is that, and can you help them manage their time, or could you for instance, it's always helpful to have it included in someone's job description, but if that's not an option, I would say understanding what their problems are or challenges are and helping to solve for it. We've had instances like that where we sit down, and we actually found in one instance where the user experience wasn't great, and they let us know that. And so we were able to improve the design of the technology, and they very much appreciated it. I would also say if you are making any enhancements or changes, always include those people in your design sessions and strategy sessions so that they feel and are a part of the change. And that, usually when people are part of the decision making up front, it does help downstream. But happy to talk to you more about that. Yeah. Next question. Any recommendations for getting executive buy-in or IT buy-in? It says if they're developing this. Quinn, any thoughts?
Well, in terms of getting executive buy-in, a good way of displaying the value is showing some of those metrics that we talked about earlier in terms of saving time, focusing on some key data points that could be captured as a part of this, and focusing on some automation. Really calling out kind of the point of utilizing a technology in the first place is demonstrating that through some outputs. This can be through a pilot or even through some design sessions on what your end product would be or what your end metrics would be that you would like to report on, and things that they would really, care to see in terms of leadership. Sidney, do you have any more on that aspect before we get into the second question?
I think that's good. I would just add reporting and data and what you can provide them. So come with some insights and be, with any data that you do have, whether it's in or out of the system, look at it, look at your SLAs against RTOs and say, oh, well, we know these are our most critical businesses. And we found that, some of our top tier vendors, the RTOs and SLAs don't match, or whatever it may be. Bring insights to them and it might show them some value.
And then kind of getting into that IT buy-in, Sidney mentioned this just now. It's you get a lot of buy-in when you start tracking against recovery time objectives and capabilities. That is something that is one kind of difficult to capture in a meaningful way. But it's also something that if you can demonstrate and start tracking against, IT folks will really care about that. And that's something to really consider is from a technological recoverability standpoint of view, some of those DR areas, capturing data around that as well. All right. So going into the next question from Graham, with our first principle of not designing the program around the technology, how do I insulate my product management process from the product management product initially adopted being changed over time? So how do we manage that over time? Wondering how to interpret that one. So
I think, go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, and please correct me if I'm off on this one, Graham, in terms of what you mean by insulating the product management process. But typically speaking, for product management and managing, change over time, you want to have a product management either team, a scrum, or a unit that has the ability to focus in on whether they're fixes, whether they're enhancements, whatever might come up that they need to focus in day in, day out. Usually then you'd want to have a representative to go out to the business, kind of what I was talking about earlier with, strategic alignment, and think about some of those long-term changes and working towards those goals. Really, when you focus your product management more on enhancement and innovation and less on bugs and fixes and design that might have been off, you have the ability to make sure that changes are carried over time. You're working towards a goal. So in a funny way, it's also kind of focusing less on the administrative and more on the strategic in some ways. But in terms of isolating your team, you really want them to be focusing on the day-to-day, and you want to have some sort of representative to speak for that unit going forward. So hopefully that kind of answers some of your question there. Oh, and then migrating, a product to the next big thing. There are opportunities for tools and technologies to be, enhanced. And there's a lot of innovation that, currently Sidney and I are seeing with supporting some of our clients currently, where you have the ability to try some new solutions out. And that is an exciting thing, kind of similar to getting away from the bugs and fixes and focusing more on ideation and innovation. But that just takes time, and it takes a lot of subject matter expertise, having some of those technical folks who have some of that vision, who can tell you, what's within the limits of the technology and what actually isn't. And that's takes some time. All right. Let's see. So what are your thoughts on connecting C-suite buy-in and their sustainability goals?
I think here, from a technology perspective at least, we may see that there will be commonalities for any materiality assessments that you may do with ESG teams. And so there may be some ability to find efficiencies or streamline those efforts within the organization with your technology. Similar to, I have seen organizations take privacy assessments and resilience assessments and combine them so that, the same people may be conducting them from your vendor. And so, on the back end, we'll be able to direct those to the different teams. So I think maybe there's opportunities there, depending on how your organization's structured, to find efficiencies in just at least the assessment, at least.
Mm-hmm. And then I know there was another question earlier in the chat, I believe, from Carol, which we may have covered a little bit of earlier, but where the majority of our stakeholders fall on the demand spectrum. So in terms of their awareness of the tool itself, it's the classic consulting answer. Unfortunately, it does depend. There have been instances where the tool is just recently rolled out and people are completely unaware that it exists. And then there have been other times where the tool's been around for a while. And as Sidney even said, sometimes things have created a little bit of a bad reputation if it's not designed in a user-friendly way. So you can almost even have adversaries. So that really just depends on at what point in the journey you are, and getting feelers out there and really getting, whatever people are in your corner, so to speak, having them support you, because it's too much just for one person or one program to do this work. You do definitely want to know, how things are being received by your end users. So maybe not the most satisfying answer, but it can just depend case by case. Unless, Sidney, you have any other thoughts on that?
Nope. So we have, how do we gather the C-suite and other user needs for metrics reporting? All sorts of data gathering without asking the C-suite user, what do they want to be reported? I think you do want to, if you are able to engage with them on any level, maybe in another forum, if it is your steerco or your risk steerco, that as far up as you can want to understand what is needed to drive business decisions. So, maybe in our steercos that we would understand what kind of discussions are being had, what kind of data is being looked at. And from there, you could ascertain something to at least understand what your initial requirements will be and provide that back to them, and then they can react to it. I think understanding as best you can and then providing something for someone to react to is oftentimes a lot easier than just straight up asking for requirements and gathering them that way. You could also get their current reporting that may or may not come from, your team. It might be coming from either, I don't know, sometimes outside firms provide reporting on risk. You may want to see those, and that can help drive.
Are there any other questions from the group? These have all been great, by the way. Thank you for all of your participation.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you all so much for being here with us this afternoon and maybe morning, and also some later evening, it looks like. We really appreciate it. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be happy to discuss further, and have a great day. Thank you.